I think a really good way of viewing the human body is to see it a little bit like a biological computer, where information is continuously taken on board via numerous different variables, and that information then in turn determines how our body decides to run the processes that occur within us. So although we might be separate from the world around us, there are numerous features that our body possesses that allows it to decode its surroundings, and then with that information that then gets relayed to the brain can then in turn get the body to respond in an appropriate manner. And the reason as to why the body is comparable to a biological computer is because sensory cues regarding our external environment are sensed by peripheral organs, and then that information is transported around the body via peripheral nerves, a little bit like how certain cables within an electronic device would transport information, and then this neuronal information is eventually received and processed by our brain, a little bit like you'd have a central processor within a computer, continuously taking data on board, processing it, decoding it, and then making sure it's in an easily understandable format. And finally, the activity or movements that are made by our internal organs or external limbs via signals that are initiated by our brain is comparable to the decoded information being projected onto the screen of a phone, a computer, or a laptop. So an electrical device firstly requires a source of input, which is electrical power. That power then gets transported via numerous different wires until the information is processed, and then the decoded information is then projected onto a screen. And this is really the final stage in this chain of events. The human body, on the other hand, takes on board inputs from multiple different sources, a few of which include the likes of touch, temperature, vision, pain, pressure, movement, and vibration. The receptors that detect this sensory information then relay it into the brain through various nerves, and this is in an electrical or neuronal format. And then once the brain is done with assembling all of this information, it then projects to our muscles and our organs, both consciously and unconsciously, to either excite or inhibit their activity. And the effects of all of this is really what then gives us a good picture as to how well our body is actually functioning. But why is all of this so relevant to the title of this video specifically? It's because breakdowns or dysfunctions to any part of this series of processes can go on to cause two very significant things to happen to the internal state of your body. Firstly, because your body wouldn't be transporting neuronal signals to and from the brain in the most optimal manner possible, then the body will have to make certain adaptations in order to fulfill that task, to allow the body to carry out the job that it's trying to carry out. And this is going to expel lots more energy, and as a result, it's going to leave you with even less expendable energy to actually live your day-to-day life with. But also, something else that's very important to note is that if we were to suffer any form of injury or dysfunction with the sensory receptors that are responsible for taking on board sensory information, then that would impact the way that our body, and then subsequently our brain, actually receives and then perceives sensory information regarding our external environment. When this mismatched information is continuously taken on board and it doesn't correctly align with reality or how our external environment actually is, then our brain actually struggles to make sense or actually process this information. And as a result, it really struggles to then in turn know how to run the rest of our body. And consequently, any environment where there are perhaps more sensory cues to decode, like visual stimuli, auditory stimuli, more potent odors, or temperature changes in the environment, these certain situations can potentially become more triggering for individuals who have issues that are pre-existing within these neuronal systems. But if you are somebody who would like to learn much more about this, and more importantly, what you can do to turn this situation around for yourself, then I highly recommend checking out the Unbeatable Blueprint online course. This is where I break this topic down into such an easily digestible format and provide you with a step-by-step plan of how you can balance out these systems and bring your body back into a far less symptomatic state. Now, the interesting thing is that there are a lot of people out there who always feel anxious and on edge practically 24/7, no matter what the environment or the circumstance they find themselves in. They always feel like they have this built up and stored amounts of nervous energy. And this could manifest as a racing heartbeat, shakiness or trembling of limbs, pulsating or pounding of veins or arteries, shortness of breath, muscle twitching, visual disturbances, or just a general feeling of restlessness or unpleasantness. But why is this phenomenon occurring in some people and not others? And it can be in response and during the most menial day-to-day activities, like when an individual is just sat there relaxing in their own home. Well, firstly, if you've just experienced a notable trauma, then this kind of reaction from the body is fairly normal and to be expected. However, if the issue is ongoing, it's persistent, and it never seems to subside, then it could be due to continual patterns of neuronal dysfunction leading to hormonal imbalances within your brain and body. Now, I've alluded to this chain of events on a few occasions before, but what this diagram basically represents is the pathway that sensory inputs take before they eventually reach the cortex, which are these two large hemispheres at the very top of our brain. And at this level is when this input is then converted into an output, which is basically an action that the brain produces. If accurate sensory information is able to be taken on board via the body through these peripheral receptors so that it's sent to the brain, and the brain is able to seamlessly process that information, then the cortex in turn should be able to charge the inhibitory functions of the basal ganglia, and what that will lead to will be quietened cognitive, limbic, and autonomic nervous system activity. Put simply, it more or less calms the body down, whereas any errors within the sensory receptors or pathways that are delivering this sensory information into the brain will continuously be delivering mismatched information into the cortex. And as a result, the cortex won't sufficiently charge the basal ganglia, and a lack of inhibitory neurotransmitters will go on to lead to hyperexcitability of the area of the brain just beneath it, called the brainstem. And then what that will ultimately result in is heightened and often erratic nervous system activity throughout the body. One way of envisaging this situation is to see the brainstem a little bit like a boat, and the basal ganglia like the ropes that are tying that boat up to a dock. Now, if the ties are tighter, then the boat will move less and will have more control. However, if we were to loosen up those ropes, then there'd be less control, more movement of the boat, and an increased risk of damages. This analogy really highlights the importance of having robust signaling within this system, because the reality is, if breakdowns have occurred within these neuronal pathways, then your brain will never be able to fully calm your body down at an unconscious level, and then heightened activity arising in muscles, blood vessels, and organs as a direct consequence of this will not only make you feel more restless and on edge, but it's also an internal state that's more energy intensive, which will force you to be hit with the double whammy of feeling tired but also wired.